Hi, welcome back to Better College. I'm Auntie Lynn, and today's episode we're going to talk about a potentially misunderstood law called FERPA. This is the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. The purpose of this law is to protect the records of college students. Um, it protects the students' records from people that are outside the university, that they have no reason to be asking for the students' information. Includes grades, it includes financial aid information, it includes class information. So the purpose of this law, as I said, is to protect the student from people outside the university who have no need for this information, um, protects the student from these people and outside sources getting that information. Now, the only time that this information can be divulged is in the case of, to put it bluntly, right? If you read the law, I'm sure there's more detailed information, but to put it bluntly, as I usually use it and a lot of administrators use it, is in the case of the student will harm themselves or someone else. And then, of course, law enforcement or medical personnel have to have access to the student's records or class records because it's in the best interest of the student or could potentially save a life. But other than that, this law protects, as I said, outside sources from accessing the student's information. Now, the misunderstanding comes in because a lot of parents or guardians or sometimes significant others, they're either involved in the student's education or many times they are paying for the student's education. And this really applies to parents and guardians mostly because they feel that I'm paying for the student's education. I have a right to know what classes are they taking, what are their grades, what kind of financial aid are they receiving. And this law actually protects the students, including from even their family or their significant others from getting information. So the workaround for that, and most universities and colleges have this electronically. It's a release form that the student must complete with their university, and they have to include the people that they are allowing to have access to their educational records. So, as I said, most universities and colleges have this electronically. There might be some colleges and universities that still use a hard copy form. Years ago, we didn't even have that. So literally, if you wanted your parent to have access to your educational information, they needed to come with you into whatever office that you wanted them to have access, to that information. But now students can complete the release form. The release form is specific. So if a student wants their parents to have access, they have to list the parents on this release form. If the student wants their significant other to have access, they have to have that person on the release form. If for some reason they forget someone, the administrator at the college or the person in the academic department, whoever the information is being requested from, if that person isn't on that form, they cannot give that information to that person. So when the student completes the release form, they have to be very specific as to who is allowed to access their records. Again, this is that transitional thing from high school to college, that more responsibility that the student now has to have for themselves. Because in high school, A high school teacher would have access to the parents would have access to the teacher. There would be conferences, everybody would be talking about the student and sharing information. When you go to college, it's not like that. So now you have to be very aware that if you want your parents or your significant other or your guardian to have access, you have to complete this release form and you have to list them on that form. Again, it's just something that you need to be aware of that didn't happen when you were in high school, something different. It's part of that transition into the responsibility for yourself and your own information. You know, you're now basically eligible to have those rights to protect your information, and you have to exercise that right. But because we're starting a new academic year, and a lot of parents, especially parents of freshmen, they're not familiar with this law. So at the beginning of the year, many times we'll have calls, or I'll get calls from parents or emails from parents, and they'll want financial aid information. They'll want to know if, for example, their student, they transferred in some grades or some testing scores, and we cannot give that information to the parent unless they're on a release form. That's the law. Um, I've had many calls with parents that are either frustrated, angry, because, hey, I'm paying for my student to go to college. I should have access to this information. And again, the difference from high school to college, this is what you think. I should have access to this information. But when you reach that level, laws are a little bit different. So now your student has to grant you the right to have access. So again, it's just something that's different. Students have to learn at this point. You're an adult, you have to advocate for yourself, and you have to be responsible for yourself and your decisions. And this is part of that. Um, but administrators and people in the university take FERPA very seriously. This is a law, and we have to follow it. And that's another thing that parents sometimes don't understand. Sometimes they think that we're being just overly protective of their student, or that we just want to create a boundary unnecessarily. And this is not true. As administrators, and when you're in education, there's certain laws that any educator has to follow. But as an administrator or someone in higher education, you have to follow this law. And many times, again, parents will think we're just creating a problem for them, and that's not the case. We have to take this law very seriously. This is an effort to protect students, protect their information from people, third parties, people that may want to get information that they shouldn't have. Safety, for example, if there's someone that the student is familiar with, but they are no longer in a relationship, or they're no longer familiar with this person, or there's been a severance of a relationship, they need to be protected from someone saying, hey, I'm calling about so and so, and I need to know what class they're in right now. That's a protection for the student. You can't tell someone, yeah, they're in math class right now and it's in building, Smith 104. You cannot do that. We cannot do that. And we can't even tell a parent that information unless they're on the release form. Ultimately, this is for the benefit of the student, to protect them from outside sources that may not have their best interests in mind. So, with that said, there is a website that is a government website, and I'm just going to click into this just so I can tell you where it is located. It is studentprivacy.ed.gov/FERPA. This is a government website. Anything that ends in gov, I always tell the students go to the gov because you know that that's the correct website when you want to get the right information. This particular website will give you the information about the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, what it covers, the information that is allowed to be given, and information that is not allowed to be given. And again, this is a very serious thing for people in the college and university environment because it is a protection for students. And we take it very seriously. And we don't want to be liable if a student were to get hurt or in some way, physically, psychologically. We don't want to be the ones that accidentally gave the information to someone who should not have had it. So we take it very seriously. And unfortunately, we do have to tell that to parents who may not be on the release form. And that's a tough call because if the student wants to maintain their privacy, they do have that right. And even if the parents are paying for their education, if the student doesn't want the parent to know and put them on the release form, they have that right to do that. And we have to explain that to the parent that if you want access to your student's information, you have to have that discussion with your student. And you have to ask them, can I be on this release form? If you don't want me on the release form, why is that? Why do you not want me to have access to your educational information? We cannot have that discussion with them. It's up to the student to make the decision who has access. We cannot force them. We cannot tell them your parent was here, so go sign the form. They have to make that decision who has access, and we are required to respect that by law. So, if something like this were to happen in your family, where either your student forgets to do the form, forgets to do the release online, or if for some reason they really choose not for you to have access to their educational information, have that conversation with your student. You know, is there a reason why? Can we have access? Most of the time, students are good with having their parents have access. They find it to be helpful. If they need their parent to call in for them, ask questions for them, etc. But there are students that do not want anyone to have access to their educational information, and that's their right. And we are required to respect that. So, as I mentioned, I will put the copy of the FERPA information from the United States government. I will put that in the link in the information. And if you are interested in reading about it, you are welcome to do so. It's very informative and it gives you the information on how important FERPA is in the higher education environment. So, once again, I hope this video was helpful. I hope you got some information from it. Please like, please subscribe, please hit the little bell so you get notification when Auntie Lynn puts out another video. And I hope to see you in the next one.